Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to talk about the lesson for 1-1, which is nets and drawings. This is our first lesson in geometry this year. So by the end of this lesson, our objective is that we will be able to make drawings as well as nets of 3D figures, also known as three-dimensional figures. So to start for the lesson, we'd like you to just think about this diagram that you see. And essentially what we have is a triangular prism. That's what right in the middle that figure is. And then there are two flashlights from the front and then like the side of the prism. And basically we want you to think about what shape would you expect the shadows in this diagram to have. So essentially if we're looking at this flashlight right here and it's shining onto the prism this way, what do we expect to see over in this area? And if you think about it, if you look straight on, what figure do you see? And the figure I see, I'll kind of highlight, is this one right here. So when I shine my flashlight onto the wall, I'm going to then see, similar over here, is a triangle. So over here, I'll see a triangle. Okay, then we have another situation. The other situation is what we're going to see over here. So over here, we see this shape. And if I shine my flashlight going in this direction, we're going to then see it over here. And over here, we will see a rectangle. Okay. So what we're doing here essentially is we're starting to visualize, right? We see a three-dimensional shape, and then we're trying to visualize, well, then what would I see in 2 dimensions? And essentially the 2-dimensional shape, the triangle and the rectangle, come from the faces of that 3-dimensional shape. Not quite sure how this little line got there. Okay, so let's get further into the lesson. Now, I just mentioned this key term before, and the term I mentioned was visualizing. So what it means to visualize is essentially, yes, we can see things, but when we visualize, it's almost imagining something else by looking at an image or a figure. But this is going to be a skill that we're going to use all year long. It's visualization. And as we get further into this curriculum, that skill is going to develop further and further. But for this lesson, what we're really going to focus on are our 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional figures and how they relate. So we have a 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional figure. So if we say 3-dimensional, it's also known as a 3D figure. 2-dimensional is known as a 2D figure. And basically what this says is that all 3D objects can be represented by a 2-dimensional figure. So if something's 3D, we can use a 2-dimensional figure and a drawing of that figure to kind of represent that 3-dimensional object, which is kind of weird. How do I have something 2D representing something 3D? And if you don't know the difference between a 2-dimensional and a 3-dimensional object, a 3D object I like to think of as like an object that almost like pops out. So like a ball would be a 2-dimensional figure or object. Now something 2D I think of as something like flat. So if a ball is a 3-dimensional object, the ball is like a sphere, then a circle would be your 2-dimensional figure. Okay. Now the way we're going to use 2-dimensional objects to represent 3D figures is by using something called a net. So we're going to fill in the term net here. So a net is a 2D diagram that you can essentially fold up to make a 3D figure. So it's something flat that if I were to fold it up, I would get a 3-dimensional object. A net actually shows all the surfaces of that 3D object laid out nicely. Okay, maybe you've seen something like this before. Often they do it with like a cube. You can cut out this, it's like almost like origami in a sense. Origami you fold, right? It's a piece of paper, but when you fold it up, you get a 3D object. And then when you lay it back down and you unfold the origami, you see all the creases, like all of the different surfaces of that piece of origami. So let's see how it works and if we can apply this and kind of work on that visualizing how it's gonna look. Okay, so let's try identifying a solid from a net. So if you look over here, in just this area, first, which one is a 3D figure and which one is the net? So take a second and see if you can kind of figure it out. And over here, this is the net, and this is a 3D object. Okay, the net's flat, and if I fold up that net, I get that three-dimensional object. All right, so when I fold up this net, how does it become the 3D object? So if I look at where the letter D is, here, and the letter D is also over here. So my D and my D. Letter is then going to appear right here. So if the D is over here on the right, what's right next to it that's going to be on the front? And if you're thinking about it, I take here. So I'm going D, and I'm going to go right to the left of it. So D to the left of it is actually the letter C. Okay, then we're going to know what's going to be right up here. Well, if I fold this, the D is going to go towards the back. The C is going to stay up in the front. What's going to be on top? Well, this E would be folded like down, and then this is actually going to be on the top over here. So we're going to have on the top E, and on the front C. Okay, so that's the first piece in visualizing something that's flat, a net, to become a three-dimensional object, that cube to the right. So let's see if we can kind of try this again. So same thing. Can we take this net over here and visualize it to become that cube with the front face that right now is B? So we have B at the front and B at the front. So now they want to know what's going to be on top and what's going to be on the right. So see if you can kind of use the same guide as like we kind of did over here up top. Right? So I'm going to give you a second to think about it. And remember, B right now is in the front, so it's going to be to the right of it, and what's going to be on top of it. Okay, so now to kind of explain. We have B, to the right of B is going to be C. And on top, still this flap up here is going to be folded down, so it's going to be E. So still we have E, and to the right is going to be, sorry, to the right is not B, excuse me. To the right is going to be C. There we go. And even further, I mean, if you think about it, what's going to be on the bottom? Right, so we can kind of do like the bottom. And if you look at the net, what do you think is going to be on the bottom? If I fold it kind of into that cube, and it's actually going to be F. And actually, if B is on the front, to the left of B over here is going to be A. And D is going to end up in the back. Okay, so this is a great way to work on visualization. So kind of a cool piece of information over here is that when they actually work on packaging designs, so like over here we have like a graham crackers box, but it could be a cereal box. It even could be something like sweet tarts. I don't know if you guys eat like sweet tarts. They're like that cylinder candy. All packaging designers actually use nets to design their boxes and containers to kind of help them out. And each net, because that's a 2D figure, has dimensions. And a dimension is basically, it gives you information about that two-dimensional figure. So what's its length? What's its width? It uses measurements, and those measurements are known as dimensions. So nets have dimensions, and when you fold up those nets, it's a three-dimensional object that still has those different dimensions. Okay, so we have to try to visualize and think. This graham cracker box right now is a rectangular prism, right? It's a 3D object, and its net is going to be flat. So even before we start thinking about this, if I look at all the faces of this graham cracker box, they're all rectangles. So my net is going to be made up of different size rectangles. So let's take a look. And we kind of gave you a little guide here. Here's our graham cracker box. And we start unfolding it. So we kind of lift up the flaps on the top and the bottom, peel open this part here, and then we begin to kind of unraveling it completely. So what will it look like when it's completely flat? Now, I'm not going to lie, this is the first time that I'm using a stylus to kind of do the notes and the lesson. So I'm going to do my best to kind of recreate this as a complete net. Now, what you want to take into account is even if your drawing is not accurate, it's a sketch. So it's okay if it's a little inaccurate. But if we look up here, what we want to try to keep in mind is that in any sort of container or box like this one that we see, there are equal sides that match. So in this box, the front and the back of the graham cracker box are going to be the same. So I'm going to write front and back. They're the same, right? The top and the bottom are going to be the same too. And what else do you think is going to be the same? Well, the left and the right. So they all have the same dimensions. Okay, so they'll have the same measurements. They're something that we're going to call congruent. They're equal. So let's kind of work to keep that in mind. So I'm going to do my best to recreate this. So basically right now I have that big rectangle right in the middle. And then I have the little flap on the side here. It's a little big. Let me erase that. Try it again. And there is, you know what? Let me see if I can, if you guys just bear with me for a minute. Maybe I could actually try to use the tool here. Now let's see if I could actually insert a oh, well, that didn't really work. It's one rectangle. See if we get this one. Erase that. All right, so we're going to use that rectangle. And we have the rectangle over here. Another rectangle over here. About the same size. Right, with the rectangle on top. My apologies again, right? I'm really trying to work with the stylus. Okay, and then we have one on the bottom. Did not think it was going to be this difficult to use, so I'm going to just make a new one. Okay, and now we have the one. If I were to fold this up, this is going to fold up, and I need the one to go right in the front. So it looks something like this. All right, so now we need to get in all the dimensions. So let's see. Here we have it. So we have the bottom piece here at a width of 14 centimeters. So that bottom piece is literally all of this. This is 14 centimeters. This is 14 centimeters. This is 14 centimeters right here. Up here is 14 centimeters. Perfect. And then we have the height of the box is 20 centimeters. So we have 20, these are all 20 centimeters. And then all these like little dimensions, which is like the width, and that's going to be our 6 centimeters. So let me see if I can actually use the text box here. Make it like 11. 6. Oh boy. So we're 6 centimeters at all those little widths. Okay? And that's how this is going to kind of work. And how did this little box get moved? And that's basically how that net works. All right, so let's move on and see if we can figure it out for this one over here. So here we have another three-dimensional figure. This is actually called a triangular prism. Most three-dimensional figures you might be familiar with, something like a cylinder, a cone, a prism, a pyramid, a sphere. And we want to see, can you try to figure out the net for this figure? So remember, the net is when you draw it in 2 dimensions. And then label the net with its dimensions. So why don't you pause this and see, how can I draw this net? And if you're trying to think about it, ask yourself, what shapes do you see here? And then how can you recreate those shapes? So, I mean, you might be thinking, I see I see triangles. And rectangles. Okay, and think about how you can kind of recreate that. So you can pause the video and try it, and then kind of come back and we will kind of have this done. So I see this maybe as having, I'll start with the triangle, like in the back. Okay, and then connected to the bottom of the triangle, I have a rectangle here. Okay, and then it looks like I have the rectangle going along the side. Oops. So I have a rectangle over here, which looks like it's a little bit longer. So if this is being flat now, to come off to the side here. And I have another rectangle the same size over here. And then I have a triangle on the bottom of the same size. And now it's dimensions. All right, so the dimensions look like the size of the triangle are 10 centimeters. The bottom of the triangle is 7 centimeters. 7. And then the rectangles have a width of 4. And when I fold this up, it's going to go along the triangle. So it's going to be 10 centimeters, 10 centimeters. And this is going to be 10 centimeters over here. And there we have it. And that's how it's going to look. Now, it wants to know for part B, is there another way that you can draw the net for this? And, it's interesting with the nets because it's all about visualization. So very well, there may be another possible net. Maybe your net, when you first paused this and drew it, didn't look like what I have up here. So if I draw this again, I mean, if I think about what this must entail, what does this have to include, right? We have to have three rectangles and two triangles. So maybe we could start again and we can say, all right, we have the triangle up top, the rectangle that it's connected to, and then what if I unfolded the other long rectangle, right? And it's actually possible that I fold this long rectangle and maybe the triangle is connected here. And now think about this. If I were to cut this out and fold it, I could cut this out. I can take this triangle, fold it upward, right? I kind of fold it upward and then almost roll this. So like this then would go there, and then I would fold the triangle up and then I would like roll it again to go there. So there are definitely different ways to draw nets. It's just about how we perceive what we see. Okay. So some things to take away from this lesson, because this lesson now is finished, is that what we're going to work through in this course is visualization. So we're going to be working on looking at something and visualizing it and being creative, right? We have to kind of work out of our comfort zone. Two terms that we're going to really be using a lot are three-dimensional objects and two-dimensional objects. 3D objects are like ones that like pop out at you. The 2D objects are like your flat figures. Okay. Any three-dimensional object can be represented using a net, which is basically like a diagram that you can cut out and almost fold up if you really wanted to do so. When you visualize, you have to think about, like we did here with this activity, if we were to fold up this net here, where would all the numbers land when it became the cube here? Okay. We are going to do practice with this lesson. So this is the video of the lesson. Hopefully you followed along and you were able to fill in all the notes. Feel free to go back over this lesson and pause at any time. And the practice questions for this lesson will be posted later in the week. I hope that this was helpful. If you have any questions, please reach out through Google Classroom or email. Enjoy the rest of your day.